Now we're ready to put all of the pieces together and actually impression a wafer tumbler cam lock. We'll begin by inserting our key into the lock and twisting and bumping using the figure 8 method, which is what I prefer to use with a wafer tumbler lock. Be careful that you don't twist the key in the lock too hard because you can break the wafers. When we examine our key, we discover that we have 5 marks on the blade of the key. We know we're dealing with a 5-tumbler cam lock, so we have marks from each and every one of the tumblers in the lock. The mark in the number 4 position is especially strong. The mark in the number 5 position is right on the tip of the key. Sometimes these are hard to see out there. Notice as we rotate the key how the changing light makes the marks disappear and reappear. If you roll the key from side to side while you're looking for the marks, you will be able to see the marks blink at you as you move the key. Now we're ready to make our first cuts on the key. Using just the tip of the file, cut directly on top of each one of the marks. Be very careful that you cut exactly on top of the mark. It's very easy to make a mistake in spacing during the early stages of impressioning. If you have any trouble aligning your file with the mark, then you can take the tip of your finger and place it alongside of the key blank and use that to guide the file in the correct position until you get your cut started. Then you can go ahead and cut it in the normal fashion. Make sure that you make the last pass across the key in the forward direction. Here's our key after we've filed all 5 of the marks. Notice that the bottoms of each one of the cuts is very smooth and flat. It's very important that we maintain our smooth finish if we're going to be able to see any future marks. The amount of metal that you take off the key is something that you will learn with practice, but in the beginning just take off as little metal as you can. It's easy to take off more metal if you need to go deeper, but you can't put it back on. After putting the key back into the lock, we get 4 more marks in positions 1 through 4. Notice how number 1 and 4 are particularly strong. They're actual gouges in the side of the key. The mark in number 1 shows the typical double marks that you get with wafer tumbler locks. Notice how the light makes the marks change as we roll the key back and forth in the light. If you do this quickly, you will see the marks blink at you. Here's our same key after we've filed the marks. Notice that we filed numbers 1 and 4 somewhat deeper than 2 and 3. This is because they were such strong marks. There was also a faint mark out on the number 5 position, but I didn't trust it. All I did was clean up that cut so that if there is indeed a mark there, it will show up better next time. After inserting the key back into the lock, twisting and bumping, we get 2 good marks this time. Once again in the numbers 1 and 4 positions. These are the positions that were giving us the real strong marks earlier. Watch as the marks change in the light. You can see that the number 1 mark actually digs into the side of the key blank itself. These are typical wafer tumbler marks. They look like double lines across the key. And here's our key after we've filed the marks. Remember, we only had 2 marks, one in the number 1 and one in the number 4 position, so that's the only place we filed the key. We left cuts 2, 3, and 5 strictly alone. After working the key in the lock one more time, we have marks in cuts numbers 1, 4, and 5 this time. That faint mark, the number 5 mark, has come back, but this time it's somewhat stronger. It will only show up, though, as we rotate the key. Watch as the light changes in the number 5 position. This is not unusual at all for a mark to only appear when the light is in a certain way. There, you see the mark across the key? A straight line across the number 5 cut. It's actually a very shiny spot where the tumbler has been pushing downward against the key blank. And here's our key after we've filed each one of the marks. Numbers 1, 4, and 5. Notice that we've kept the bottoms of each of the cuts just as smooth and flat as we possibly can. We haven't touched cuts numbers 2 and 3 because we didn't have a mark there. After working the key in the lock, we get two real strong marks out near the tip in cuts numbers 4 and 5. These are real deep gouges in the bottom of each one of the cuts. You can still see them when the key is turned almost sideways. This type of mark tells us that we're very near the end. You only get this kind of mark when you're very close to having a working key. And here's our key after we've cut it, ready to go back into the lock. We're keeping the bottoms of the cuts just as smooth and flat as we can. The amount of metal that we took off this time was not as much as earlier because our marks told us that we were very near to having a working key, so we didn't want to take off too much metal. Insert the key back into the lock, twist and bump, and it starts to turn. It does not turn easily, it's tight all the way around. And here's our key. We have 4 real strong marks, the same kind of marks we had in 4 and 5 earlier, but these are in 1, 3, 4, and 5. Notice especially the ones in 1 and 4. These are real deep marks. But remember, this is a working key, so we just barely want to file the key just enough to make the marks go away to get a good, smooth working key. And here is our finished key. We've cleaned up cuts numbers 1, 3, 4, and 5, and we now have a good, smooth turning key.